They sealed my water well with concrete, then sent me a letter thanking me for contributing to the greater good. That's when I knew it wasn't about regulations. It was about control. My name is Caleb Foster. I'm a retired geologist, a widower, and I live alone on a piece of desert land in Arizona that's been in my family for nearly 140 years. My great-great-grandfather claimed it in 1883 under the Homestead Act, and our family never left. My property sits just outside a modern development called Sunset Ridge Estates, a walled desert community with palm-lined streets, manicured gravel lawns, and a shiny little HOA full of people who think they know what's best for everyone else. I never signed up for it. I never agreed to their rules. But lately, they've decided that doesn't matter. It started with a knock at my door. A woman in a salmon-colored blazer stood outside, fanning herself with a clipboard. She looked like someone who ordered HOA fines with her morning coffee. Her name was Karen Stories, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. "Mr. Foster," she said with a thin-lipped smile, "we've received multiple concerns from the community about your well." I stared at her. "My well? You mean the one on my land?" She nodded like a kindergarten teacher explaining crayons to a child. "Yes, but the board recently voted to consolidate all water resources into a community-controlled system. Independent wells are problematic. They disrupt allocation and monitoring." I almost laughed. "I don't use your water. I've never asked for a drop." "That's precisely the issue," she said, glancing at her clipboard. "You're bypassing community infrastructure." I should have slammed the door then and there. But I was raised better than that, and besides, I didn't yet realize how far she was willing to go. The next week, I received a formal letter declaring that my water usage had become incompatible with Sunset Ridge's sustainability goals. It ordered me to cap my well and connect to the HOA-approved water provider. The letter wasn't signed by the county, or the state, or even a utility company. Just a tidy HOA logo in the corner, and Karen's name at the bottom. I ignored it. So they escalated. First came the citations. My fence was not aesthetically compliant. My solar panels reflected light at an inappropriate angle. My gravel wasn't the approved color code for desert tones. All bogus, all unenforceable, but they piled up fast. Then came the surveillance. A white SUV with HOA Volunteer Patrol stenciled on the door began idling across from my driveway. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Someone even started taking photos of my well from behind the fence line. And then, one morning, I woke up to find a construction crew in reflective vests on my land. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They poured concrete into the shaft of my well like they were patching a pothole. When I shouted at them to stop, one of them calmly handed me a laminated notice, "Emergency Water Use Violation, authorized by Sunset Ridge HOA." My well, the same one my grandfather hand-drilled and I'd maintained for 20 years, was gone in less than an hour. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd pay their water fees, join their little club, and give up everything my family had built. They didn't know who I was. And they sure as hell didn't know what I had buried in my filing cabinet upstairs. After they sealed my well, I didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. I didn't trust myself to speak without screaming. I hauled drinking water in jugs from the nearest gas station, 20 miles round trip. I washed with buckets. Cooked with rationed gallons. It was humiliating, deliberate, and precise. Then the citations started coming. At first, I thought they were reruns of the nonsense I'd already received: fence height violations, non-standard gravel color, excessive dust displacement from my truck tires. But no. These were new. One claimed my front porch had a non-conforming wind chime that exceeded the community's decibel allowance for ambient noise. Another accused me of storing unauthorized equipment, in plain view, a stack of firewood I'd neatly covered under tarp. My favorite? A violation notice stating my compost barrel posed olfactory risks to neighboring homes. There were no neighboring homes. I live on 3 acres of open scrubland. The closest neighbor is a half-mile away. Each envelope arrived with the same polished Sunset Ridge HOA logo, stamped with Karen's tidy signature and a QR code linking to their digital resolution center. But that site didn't allow appeals, only credit card payments. The goal was clear: bleed me dry or wear me down. One morning, I found a notice taped to my mailbox with fluorescent orange tape that read, "Community Engagement Reminder. Non-compliant residents are encouraged to seek integration." I had to read it 3 times to understand what it even meant. Integration? That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me. She was trying to erase me. To fold my independence into her HOA framework like a rogue puzzle piece that didn't match the picture she was building. It wasn't about rules. It was about message. If Caleb Foster, the last independent man in Sunset Ridge, could be brought into line, everyone else would fall in place. She started sending welcome teams to my door. HOA volunteers with matching polos and clipboards, speaking in corporate-friendly tones like salespeople who also filed lawsuits. They offered me brochures with smiling faces and phrases like, "A unified community begins with you." One guy, a younger man in his 20s, stepped onto my porch and said cheerfully, "We just want to help you understand what being a part of Sunset Ridge really means, sir." I stared him down. "It means being told what color dirt to buy." He chuckled awkwardly, then glanced over his shoulder like he needed permission to speak. Behind him, parked just off the road, was that same white HOA patrol SUV. Karen sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand. Watching. Recording. Waiting. She wasn't here to help. She was documenting everything. Waiting for the moment I cracked, lost my temper, pushed someone, gave her an excuse to escalate things even further. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I turned on my own camera, one of several trail cams I'd installed around the property years ago to track coyotes and javelinas. Now, I repurposed them. If she was watching me, I'd watch her too. And while she was busy papering my life with threats and citations, I finally made the decision I'd been avoiding since they'd sealed the well. I went up to the attic, opened the old cedar chest that had belonged to my grandfather, and pulled out the metal file folder with his name etched on it. Inside were deeds, maps, and something I hadn't looked at in decades. A parchment copy of the original land patent signed by the U.S. government in 1883. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Because if it said what I remembered it said, Karen hadn't just messed with the wrong man. She'd messed with the wrong century. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the land patent spread out before me, its parchment edges yellowed and brittle, but the words still sharp. The language was old, almost poetic in its phrasing. "Hereby grants this parcel of land, along with all mineral and water rights therein, to Elias Foster and his descendants in perpetuity, free from interference by future entities or jurisdictions unless superseded by federal mandate." That line about water rights hit me like thunder. Karen hadn't just overstepped. She'd crossed into federally protected territory. At sunrise, I made photocopies of the patent and all supporting documents, tax records, maintenance logs, and a county plat map from the 1950s showing the original well. Then I called the county water department. The man on the line, a gravel-voiced clerk named Everett, asked for my parcel number. 5 minutes later, he whistled through his teeth. "Well, I'll be. You're one of the originals." "Originals?" "Patented landholders. There aren't many left around here. We're not even allowed to issue citations on properties like yours without going through federal review." "What's the issue?" I told him. Everything. The citations. The well. The concrete. He was quiet for a long time. "Who the hell gave them the right to touch that well?" "Some lady named Karen. HOA president. She just bought herself a lawsuit," he muttered. "You got a case, Mr. Foster." "A strong one." But it wasn't about lawsuits for me. Not yet. It was about survival. That week, the heat climbed past 105 degrees. My emergency water was running low. I had no AC, just fans, and no way to irrigate the few mesquite and creosote shrubs I'd been nurturing for decades. The land was drying up around me, and the irony wasn't lost. I was dying of thirst sitting atop my own water. On the third day, I walked the half-mile into Sunset Ridge with a sign strapped to my back. Stolen water equals stolen rights. I didn't say a word. I just walked. Past their pristine desert landscaping. Past their beige stucco homes and color-matching mailboxes. Every eye behind every blind was watching. Karen came out before I made it to the community center. "Mr. Foster," she said sharply, "you are in violation of several ordinances by entering HOA grounds with unauthorized signage." "Is that so?" I said, stopping at the edge of the sidewalk. "Because last I checked, the sidewalk was built with public funds. And I've got some paperwork of my own you might want to see." I held out a copy of the land patent. She didn't take it. Just stared at it like it might explode. "That document is obsolete," she said, with a tight, controlled smile. "HOA regulations supersede private claims when it comes to shared resources. There's nothing shared about my well," I snapped. "You crossed a legal boundary, and a moral one. You cut me off from the only water source on my land and then had the audacity to tell me I should be grateful." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Foster, if you make a scene, the board will be forced to escalate the matter." "Oh, trust me," I said. "The scene's just getting started." I turned and walked back home, the sun scorching my neck, sweat stinging my eyes. But my spine had never felt straighter. That night, I drafted a letter to every homeowner in Sunset Ridge. I told them what had happened, the illegal destruction of my well, the false citations, the surveillance. I included photos of the land patent, marked sections in bold, and links to relevant state and federal laws. I didn't make threats. I didn't ask for sympathy. I simply said, "If they can take my water, they can take yours next." The next day, I taped the letter to every community bulletin board I could find. Mailboxes, clubhouse doors, walking trails. I knew they'd be torn down, but not before enough eyes saw them. By the end of the week, people started talking. A retired judge named Emily Thorne stopped me at the feed store. "I read what you wrote," she said. "You're not wrong. The HOA's gotten power hungry." Another neighbor, Tom Delgado, ex-Marine, offered me water barrels and storage tanks. Still, Karen didn't back down. 2 days later, I received a final notice, taped to my truck windshield. It stated that I was no longer recognized as a cooperative member of the Sunset Ridge community, and would be restricted from future neighborhood resources. That's when I realized it wasn't just about the well. Karen wanted me erased, socially, economically, and literally. But she hadn't counted on one thing. I had nothing left to lose, except the truth. And I was about to bring it straight to their front door. If you think Caleb was right to fight back, comment 1. If you think he should have just complied, comment 2. Let's see where the community stands. The HOA had tried to bury my well. So I started digging in return. Not with a shovel, but with history. For the next 3 days, I turned my cabin upside down. My grandfather's filing cabinet hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. Each drawer groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. Inside were manila folders stained with age, labeled in his tight, slanted handwriting: taxes, well maintenance, family correspondence, land grant. That last one stopped me cold. I pulled the folder out slowly, like it might vanish if I moved too fast. Inside was a gold mine. Not just the original parchment patent, which I'd already copied, but notarized statements from 3 generations of Fosters, each reaffirming the claim to water rights on our land. I found blueprints of the first hand-dug well from 1894. I found receipts from 1926, when my great-grandfather paid for steel reinforcements. I found photographs, black and white, frayed at the corners, showing men in overalls beside windmill rigs and concrete troughs. This wasn't just a document. This was a legacy. But what mattered most was a sealed envelope, marked in red ink. For legal purposes only, federal water rights enclosed. I opened it. Inside was a carbon copy of a 1979 letter from the Bureau of Land Management confirming that Foster Parcel 233A was exempt from municipal water mandates due to established pre-appropriation rights. A yellow sticky note, in my grandfather's handwriting, was still attached. Keep this. One day, someone will try to take what's ours. He was right. I laid the papers out on the table, arranged them in chronological order, and started snapping high-resolution photos of everything. I uploaded them to a secure cloud folder. Then I made 3 printed copies, boxed them in waterproof binders, and labeled them in bold black Sharpie. Property rights, Foster Family Estate. That night, as I sat beside the dry well they'd entombed, a strange feeling settled over me, not anger, not even satisfaction. Something older. Something rooted. Vindication. For decades I'd thought of that well as just a tool. A convenience. But now I understood why my grandfather spent so much time preserving every receipt, every note, every county record. Because he knew someone like Karen Stokely was coming. And now, I had something she didn't. A legal lineage older than her entire HOA. The next morning, I drove into town to visit an old friend, Edgar Riley, a semi-retired water rights attorney who used to fish with my dad. Edgar had gray hair, desert-worn hands, and an office that smelled like tobacco and heat. He listened as I explained everything, then flipped through my folder for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, he looked up, eyes gleaming. "This isn't just solid," he said. "This is bedrock. If she poured so much as a cup of concrete into that well, she trespassed on federally protected land and interfered with a sovereign utility. That's a felony in Arizona." He leaned back and smiled. "You feel like making some noise?" I nodded. "Louder than a busted wellhead." He chuckled and handed me a typed letter. "This is a notice of intent to litigate. We'll serve it directly to the HOA president. But first, we make a copy for every single resident." I stared at the words on the page, bold and unforgiving. Karen had tried to silence me by cutting off my water. But she'd forgotten something. I don't dry up that easily. By noon the next day, every mailbox in Sunset Ridge had a bright yellow envelope sticking out of it. Inside each one was a letter printed on crisp legal stationery, signed by Edgar Riley, J.D. It read, "Dear resident, you are hereby informed that the Sunset Ridge HOA has unlawfully seized and disabled a federally protected private utility located on Parcel 233A, owned by Mr. Caleb Foster. Enclosed you will find copies of historical land patents and legal documentation proving said ownership and water rights dating back to 1883. I didn't need to read the rest. I'd helped write it. But what mattered wasn't the content, it was the timing. Because that same afternoon, Edgar submitted an official request to the HOA board under the Arizona Open Meeting Law, demanding a special emergency session be held to address the potential civil and criminal liabilities the association now faced. HOA bylaws required 48-hour notice. We gave them 72. I wanted this meeting public. I wanted neighbors. Witnesses. Phones recording. Karen, of course, tried to stall. She replied with a terse email through the HOA's general inbox claiming the accusations were frivolous and legally baseless, and that Mr. Foster had failed to comply with modern water safety protocols. But then she made a mistake. She CC'd the wrong person. One of the residents on the HOA mailing list forwarded her response, along with her internal notes, to Edgar. In it she wrote, "We can't let this escalate. If people see his documents, they'll start questioning every HOA restriction we've passed in the last 5 years. Boom. That wasn't just damage control. That was intent. Proof that she knew she'd overstepped, and feared what might happen if the truth came out. The moment Edgar read it, he grinned. She just handed us motive on a silver platter. We printed the email and added it to the binder. By the time the special session was announced, buzz had already taken over the neighborhood. People whispered at the mailboxes. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years stopped by to ask if the rumors were true. One woman, clutching a printout of the land patent, whispered, "This changes everything, doesn't it?" I nodded. And then, on the night of the meeting, I showed up with my evidence and backup. Edgar walked in beside me, briefcase in hand. Behind us, 2 local journalists from the Arizona Independent Ledger had arrived, tipped off anonymously. Their cameras were rolling before the board even sat down. The meeting room, usually half empty, was packed. Karen sat at the head of the table, still wearing that salmon blazer-like armor. Her jaw was tight, her fingers laced over her clipboard. But for the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't surrounded by allies, just eyes. Watching. Waiting. She opened with her usual voice of authority. Mr. Foster, you've made some extraordinary claims. Tonight, we will review your materials and determine if any action is required on behalf of the board. I stood, held up the original land patent, mounted, framed, and sealed in archival glass. No action is required, I said clearly. Only acknowledgement. What you did to my well was illegal. I have documents proving sole ownership, federally protected rights, and 3 generations of tax records to back them up. You trespassed on land that predates your HOA by a century. Murmurs spread through the room like wildfire. Should HOA have the power to control your private well? Comment yes or no below. Karen glanced at Edgar. And you are? He didn't even blink. The guy who'll be representing Mr. Foster in civil court if this isn't resolved immediately. Karen's composure cracked, just slightly. Her smile twitched. Her clipboard creaked under her tightening grip. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. Because the next words out of my mouth weren't directed at her. They were for everyone else in that room. I turned to face the crowd. This isn't just about a well, I said, voice steady. It's about how far a private organization can go before it forgets that it serves people, not the other way around. I held up a set of laminated documents, handing copies to the front row. Edgar passed extras down each aisle. These are official records from the Bureau of Land Management, I continued. They confirm that my family has owned the water and mineral rights on Parcel 233A since 1883. That means the Sunset Ridge HOA has no authority over my land. Not the plants, not the fence, and sure as hell not the well. Gasps and low mutterings swept through the room. One man in a golf shirt raised his hand. Wait, are you saying they poured concrete into a legally protected private utility? Yes, Edgar said calmly. Without permission. That's felony vandalism under Arizona state law. Karen spoke up, her tone clipped. We were acting under community safety guidelines. No, you weren't, I said, stepping forward. Because you never filed for a safety review. You never consulted a hydrologist. You didn't even issue a written notice. You trespassed onto private land, damaged property, and then tried to bury the evidence, literally. The 2 journalists in the back were scribbling furiously. I pulled out the last piece of evidence. The internal email Karen had mistakenly CC'd. I read it aloud. If people see his documents, they'll start questioning every HOA restriction we've passed in the last 5 years. I let the silence settle. That sentence hit harder than any citation ever could. It wasn't about weeds, or fence paint, or gravel color. It was about control. Karen's control. The room shifted. Heads turned. People leaned back in their chairs, crossing arms, whispering. A few stood up. One woman in the corner folded her arms and said flatly, So what else have you been hiding from us? Karen's face flushed. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tight veneer of command that had held this community in place for years, meetings, newsletters, volunteer patrols, was crumbling right in front of her. Then something unexpected happened. A man stood up in the second row, Tom Delgado, the retired Marine who'd offered me water barrels. He cleared his throat. My family moved here 8 years ago, he said. Karen fined us for having a flagpole 6 inches too tall. I didn't fight it because I didn't think I had a choice. He turned to the board. But if she's willing to do this to Caleb, someone with documented rights, then what protections do any of us really have? Someone else added. She fined me for shade cloth over my garden. Said it wasn't aesthetically uniform. Another voice chimed in. She threatened to sue me over a hummingbird feeder. It snowballed. One by one, residents stood and spoke, quiet at first, then louder, as if they were rediscovering the sound of their own voices. Karen tried to regain control, banging her clipboard like a gavel. Order! This is a formal hearing, and we must respect board procedures. No, I said, stepping forward. This is a community. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, it's speaking for itself. Cheers. Applause. Not from everyone, but enough. Karen's clipboard trembled slightly in her grip. I walked to the projector and clicked through a final set of slides, comparison photos of my property before and after HOA interference, annotated with timestamps and legal citations. The room went quiet again, not because they weren't with me, but because the proof was undeniable. Then Edgar stepped up. We are filing for full reimbursement of damages, legal fees, and restitution for trespassing and destruction of a private utility. If the HOA refuses to comply, we are prepared to take this to court. And, he added, glancing toward the journalists, we welcome public attention. Karen looked like a balloon slowly deflating. Frank, the HOA's treasurer, who had been silent all night, finally leaned into his mic. I move that we drop all enforcement actions against Mr. Foster and begin negotiations for full restitution. A stunned pause. Then, a second board member nodded. Seconded. The motion passed, unanimously. Karen didn't even vote. She just stared at the table. It was over. Or at least, the power she once held was. As I left the meeting, several neighbors came up to shake my hand. Some apologized. Some asked questions. Others simply nodded, acknowledging something unspoken, something long overdue. Not fear. Respect. 3 weeks after the meeting, a check for $18,250 arrived in my mailbox. Stamped and signed by the Sunset Ridge HOA. It covered the cost of well restoration, legal fees, and the unlawful disruption of utility services. Their words, not mine. The letter came without apology, but the money spoke plenty. And so did the envelope tucked underneath it, Karen Stokely's resignation letter. She cited personal reasons and a desire to refocus on her garden. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The community had already spoken for me. The following Monday, a work crew, this time from the county, not the HOA, arrived to dig out the concrete. They worked carefully, respectfully, even asking if I wanted to supervise. I didn't. I sat on the porch and watched, sipping coffee from my grandfather's old tin mug. By sundown, the well cap had been restored, the pump reinstalled, and the water, cold, clean, and ancient, flowed once more. But I didn't stop there. With Edgar's help, I filed paperwork to register the Foster land as a private conservation easement, permanently protected from future development, zoning changes, or annexation attempts. The well would remain private, but I designated a portion of the land for public educational tours focused on sustainable desert water practices. I built a small open-air shelter beside the well and mounted a plaque that read, "This well stands not just for water, but for principle. For heritage. For freedom. And for every neighbor who's ever been told to sit down and shut up." The plaque didn't bear my name. It bore my grandfather's. People still come by. Some walk the path in silence. Others ask questions. A few just sit on the bench nearby and listen to the wind move through the sagebrush. And sometimes, as they leave, they nod toward the well. Not because they have to. Because they want to. And that's the point, isn't it? Respect that's earned, not demanded. Community that's chosen, not enforced. And rules that serve people, not people serving rules. Karen tried to dry me out. But in the end, all she did was uncover the deepest thing I had left, my roots. And I'm not going anywhere. Hit like if you believe in protecting property rights. And don't forget to subscribe for more wild HOA Karen stories like this one. In the end, this wasn't just a fight over a well, it was a stand for something bigger. We live in a world where it's easy to let small rules pile up into quiet oppression, where community standards can be twisted into tools of control. But what this story reminds us is that rights, once understood and protected, are stronger than any clipboard or citation. It teaches us that documentation matters, that history matters, and that when someone tells you to be quiet and comply, the most powerful response isn't rage, it's truth, calmly spoken and backed by evidence. It also reminds us that neighbors aren't defined by proximity, but by principle. Those who stood by Caleb weren't always the loudest, but they were the ones who chose courage over comfort when it mattered. So whether you're dealing with an HOA, a boss, or a bully in any form, don't underestimate the quiet power of standing your ground, knowing your rights, and honoring the legacy of those who came before you. Because sometimes the deepest wells are the ones we don't see, until someone tries to fill them in.